from the NewsChannel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight. Tonight is Wednesday, tomorrow Thursday, and tomorrow is Election Day. For the past several episodes, several Open Lines, we've been talking about schools, going back to school, but tonight we are focusing on politics because tomorrow people are going to the polls and we will get a verdict on some races you've seen on TV a lot. That Senate race on the Republican side between Sethi and Haggerty, we should get some sort of decision on, hopefully tomorrow night. And then there's some other issues. Mail-in ballots, they're in play in a way that they haven't been ever before, and it's kind of a preview of what may happen as far as mail-in ballots for November. Always happy to have with us, and as you know, we've been doing Zooms lately, Zoom interviews. Tonight we have a live person in the studio. Pat Nolan is with us. Pat, thank you. You're right across the way. So I'm going to fight. Oh, there. I'm going to fight turning my head because you're right there.
I know the feeling. Right? I do this in the same studio I do my Inside Politics show. We've not had a live guest in the studio since the first part of March, so it's different. It's different.
It's nice to not have Zoom between us. So Pat is here. Thank you, Pat. All right.
Sure.
So I kind of laid out some of the stuff that we can talk about. How does turnout look thus far? We've had early voting, a hot Senate race on the Republican side. How does turnout look statewide and here in Davidson County?
Well, statewide, it's actually down a little bit from 2 years ago. But remember, 2 years ago, we not only had a U.S. Senate seat on the ballot, we also had the governor's race on the ballot. And you had a very active primary on the Republican side 2 years ago. That still doesn't mean the Democrats' turnout's actually up, but that doesn't mean there are more Democrats voting. Actually, the Republicans are still. They're not 2-to-1 anymore, but they're still well ahead of what the Democrats are in terms of who decided to vote in those primaries. So I think we're going to have a pretty good turnout. It's a little bit different. You don't know how many people have voted, but their votes being mailed in. And in this state, the way they do it with absentee mail-in voting, the Election Commission has to have it in their hand on Election Day. In some states, when they do the voting like that, it just has to be postmarked on Election Day, which means that you may not get it for another day or two after that. So that may make some difference. I know the Election Commission here a couple of days ago was sort of reminding people they need to go ahead and mail it because the mail's not always fast, and they want to make sure they get it all in their hands before then. They claim they're going to have it all counted and ready to go, absentee and early vote, by the time they close the day of voting places at 7 o'clock. We'll see how that works. Generally speaking, they're not always fast.
Yeah, this is, to me, that's a big deal as far as this election goes tomorrow night. This is kind of a preview, and it's on a smaller scale, yes, obviously, of what is going to happen in November. Because, again, the court ruling said that you can vote, essentially, if you're concerned about your health and COVID, you can vote by mail. And so the question becomes, how quickly are we going to be able to count that? We've heard the president say that it can lead to long delays and big problems. Do we have any sense of how many people are taking advantage of that and whether we'll see delays tomorrow night?
Well, from everything I've heard, I don't have the latest numbers, but everything I heard, they had a record number of people who wanted to vote by mail absentee in Tennessee. You need to keep in mind that the amount of volume of mail for absentee is going to be a lot higher in November. And there's always a bigger turnout. The biggest vote ever held in this county every 4 years is the presidential election. I mean, we vote maybe 100,000 if we're lucky in a mayoral race, and that's been true all the way going back into the 60s. But you have a presidential race, we'll easily vote 250,000 people. Now, how many of those people are going to vote absentee versus what they've done before? And we may even have more than that, because on both sides of the aisle, there's a lot of interest in this presidential race in particular, and I think you're going to see a lot of people voting across the country. And so therefore the bigger the volume, particularly if a race is close, it may take a little while to figure out exactly what's going to happen and who won. Remember, even before we had any big emphasis on mail-in voting because of the pandemic, it took us the better part of a month or more to figure out who won the presidential race in 2000. We didn't find that out until December 13th. But again, anytime you have a tie election, and we had more than our share of those, you can have a problem with that. So the other thing I think the people ought to keep in mind is that right now, under the court ruling that came out of the Davidson County Court, that the Court of Appeals decided to go ahead and move straight to the Supreme Court, you can vote almost by right if you want to do it because of COVID-19 or just because of your health. The Supreme Court has already heard arguments about this case. They could rule any time at this point about whether they're going to make that their ruling, and therefore that would be the final word on how you can vote absentee in the state. It's possible, just because this is the way it can go in lawsuits, they may rule in favor of the state and you go back to the old system, which means people who may have an absentee ballot and were going to use it because they didn't want to vote for COVID may not be. I'd be interested to see what the state decides to do, because I don't know that you have to state any reason one way or the other when you ask for the ballot anymore because of that. So I don't know what they'll tell you taking it because you normally want to do it, you're over 60 years old, you meet one of the other criteria, or is it only because you suddenly have decided that you want to do it because of the COVID situation? It may be some people will now have to vote early or go ahead and vote election day itself, depending on, again, what the court does. And there's been a lot of problems with this in a lot of other states, and there's been a lot of problems because the COVID has been so severe in some places. And the other issue that I think so far does not seem to have been a problem, at least when I voted early, they're not having the problems at the polls with the election workers. A lot of those people tend to be silver-haired, like me, and so therefore they're not as many of them, and they may be a little bit more likely not to want to work this particular election because of the COVID being so severe. So they've been looking more and more to recruit more people. You do get paid, but you don't get paid very much to do it. But we're seeing a transition in that too. They're going to have to get younger people into it,
right?
Particularly if you can't have these kind of health problems.
Fascinating. So that'll be interesting to see tomorrow if they're able to staff all the polling locations. I would think they would be. I would hope we would have known.
In
by
some
now.
states where they've not, they've had to basically compact a lot of precincts into one location. In some cases, the locations have been so big, and then people couldn't get in it, and then they locked the doors, and it was awful in some states.
And you're saying that for the November election, we don't know yet about mail-in ballots here in Tennessee. There's still a Supreme Court decision to come.
Well, there's still what we know at this point is that what's happening in August will happen in November, but that could change based on what the court decides, depending on when the court rules.
And so then my question is, well, tomorrow, will there do you think we'll know the winner of some of these big races, Hagerty, Sethi? Will we know the winner tomorrow night, or could the fact that we've had mail-in ballots and the opportunity for many more mean that we don't know who won tomorrow night?
We may not. I mean, it depends on how close it is. I think the closer the race, the more it just always seems like every little precinct that's out there makes a difference. And if you watch most of the election coverage over the years, there's always some election coverage, whether it's a local race or 2, 3, 4 precincts that just haven't come out yet. Nobody quite knows where they are. They didn't quite get in. Somebody didn't bring in the right disc or something else like that. So you've had all these kind of problems. Put that on a statewide 95 county basis, you could have it. Most people think it's going to be a very close race, so it's possible we may go into Friday morning trying to figure out who has actually won it. But there may be a big enough margin with the precincts that are left that it'll be another test for Associated Press and the other media outlets that like to call these races. I do not know if any of the networks are down here polling this or exit polling this particular race. They may not. We're the only primary in the country Thursday night. There were several back on Tuesday, so maybe that makes it easier or less likely for them to do it. I don't know, but they just get a pretty good idea of what they're going to do. And if their sample precincts show a particular thing, they'll go. They may not pick the exact margin, but they'll go ahead and project somebody. So again, watch those different outlets to see who decides to do that. And it may be later in the night before we find out something. I'm
fascinated by this race. I mean, this race, you turn on our news, and it's one commercial after another. They are each running multiple commercials within one commercial break. They must be spending so much money, and it says to me it must be very close. The New York Times wrote something about this race, the Hagerty-Sethi race, today.
Politico wrote an article about a week ago that called it the nastiest Republican primary in the nation.
Wow.
Now, it's interesting. These two candidates don't disagree on any substance in terms of policy. In fact, they both their basic deal is I'm as close to Donald Trump as I can possibly be. Now, Hagerty does have the Trump endorsement. Sethi doesn't, but the Sethi people feel like they're getting more of the people that were important in Donald Trump getting elected in Tennessee. They feel like Hagerty got the endorsement primarily because of some family connections that he had with the Trump family, and that has a lot to do with that. But I think you don't see a lot of differences. When there are no differences in policy, all the differences become on personality and who's the true conservative, because that's what this has all been about. And Ben, it's not just the campaigns putting on ads. We've had several outside PACs come in and putting in the money, and even the campaigns have gotten involved in it to some degree. The staff people have had articles written about who they used to work for, and gee, they used to work for Mitt Romney, used to work for somebody else, and what does that mean? And does that mean they're true Republicans? It's been kind of odd, and this is the second kind of major primary the Republicans have had. The 2018 gubernatorial race had the top two candidates knocking each other's block off for several weeks, and it wound up the third place candidate at the time the attack started, Bill Lee. He wound up winning that primary because people got turned off by all the negative ads.
And this is, do you have a sense of how this might go? I mean, Haggerty, Sethi, there's also a third candidate. We see his commercials as well. But do you have a sense of how this might go tomorrow night?
A lot of people, when this started, everybody thought it was going to be a walk in the park for Haggerty. He may have thought that too. And then you had the whole COVID thing come up in the shutdown, and I think everybody had to go back and kind of refigure what they were going to do. And I also think that Sethi has been a little bit better retail campaigner. This is the first time either one of them's run any kind of campaign, and even on a statewide level. I think Sethi's a little more. I haven't had Haggerty in the studio. We tried several times to get him on Inside Politics. We had Sethi on twice, including last week, although again he was by Zoom last week. He's very personable. He does a very good job on his feet, so I think he could well come in and win, but Haggerty also has a lot of the Republican establishment behind him. They may feel their future's on the line, so they may be pulling out all the stops to do that, which may be why you see some of the ads that have come out. Even just there's been new ads even in the last couple of days. In fact, I saw one that the Haggerty campaign has that basically takes Mitt Romney, who Haggerty's being attacked about. He's licking him in with Sethi and calling them both weak-kneed Republicans. I mean, that's sort of a way to try to flip that argument around on people. I don't know whether people are figuring up on that. After a while, they may forget who Mitch Romney's for who, or who's for what. And
right.
We've had a lot of senators come in, Republican senators come in. I mean, Ted Cruz has been in here campaigning for Sethi. Tom Cotton's been in from Arkansas to campaign for Haggerty.
What is the dividing line? Why? I mean, yeah, because they're establishment people. I guess Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, isn't it?
It may be an effort for some of those, like Rand Paul and Cruz, to put their markers down in Tennessee for what the future Republican Party may be after 2020, particularly if Donald Trump is no longer the president. Remember, the Republican Party will not have a titular leader if Donald Trump goes down in 2020. So the party will be up for grabs in that. Not only will it be up for grabs in Tennessee, I think Tennessee is and will remain a Republican state. But in a lot of other places around the country, there are going to be times to figure out, okay, what happens now?
And then, so the winner, this is a Republican primary, hard fought. They must feel, we're obviously a very red state, they must feel like the winner of the Republican primary is well positioned to win the seat. But on the Democratic side, you certainly don't see the TV commercials. Who is it likely that the winner of Haggerty and Sethi would face?
I think James Mackler is the most likely person. He's a veteran. He did some service in some of the Gulf War situations. He's also a lawyer. He tried to run 2 years ago, but when Phil Bredesen got in the race to run for the U.S. Senate, he got out. He's back in this time. He's begun to run some television. I've seen some yard signs for him out in Nashville, but obviously he will be the major underdog, and it's hard to believe he'll be able to get the kind of resources he needs. Certainly they always hope, if you're an underdog campaign, that the National Party and other groups will come in and help, but the Democrats, quite frankly, have so many targets of opportunities to try to take over the Senate that he may still not be very high on the list to be able to get in there, because I think he'll have to convince people he has a chance. Remember, 2 years ago, the Democrats had what they thought was a very, very well-funded, very well-known, very popular former governor and former mayor of Nashville, Phil Bredesen, and he still finished 10 points behind Marcia Blackburn. So now 2018 and 2020 are two different political years, but still I think you have to wonder how the Democrats will have a chance to win based on what's happened in the past, when they had a much better well-known candidate than they're going to have this year and couldn't make it and lost by double digits.
That's a fair question. I mean, if Phil Bredesen did not do well, you wonder, who can as a Democrat. Then the other interesting race, Jim Cooper. So Jim Cooper running to keep his seat in Congress. He's been there a long time. But again, you see him on TV all of a sudden, and you realize, well, maybe he's worried. What does his race look like?
Well, it could be. I mean, he's got two candidates running against him. The one most likely to give him a tussle, if that happens, is Keita Haynes. She's an African American activist. She did spend some time in prison over a drug deal that she says actually was not fair, and eventually she got out of that. She's been in the public defender's office here. Jim Cooper has not had anybody run against him for 10 years in the primary. And interesting enough, in the year he has two Democrats running against him, this time he has no Republicans or independents. So whoever wins tomorrow night in this race will be the congressman. They'll still have to be elected officially in the November election, but there is nobody running against whoever the winner is tomorrow night in the primary in the November election. Jim Cooper's run, I've gotten 5 direct mail pieces from him. You have to spend quite a bit of money to do that many direct mail pieces, and a lot of them emphasize African American issues. And you've seen these races across the country. Saw one in Missouri just the other night where African American activists have motivated their base, and they have managed to come in and defeat longtime Democratic incumbents. It's almost as if you've been a longtime white Democratic representative, you have to prove that you really have been doing something to help, and if things are better, how come things are not better and you've been in office this long? So it's going to be interesting to see. Jim Cooper has been able to win these races very easily. Of course, he had any opposition in his party. He's had the opposition in the Republican side, but he's won those usually 70-30, 80-20. I don't know if it's going to be like that tomorrow night. Well, another reason to look for that is that the absentee vote in Davidson County and the early vote is up quite a bit, and I can't think of any other reason for why it would be up quite a bit other than that particular race. There's not a whole lot to vote on in the Democratic races in Davidson County. There are some school board races, but that's not a county-wide situation. That's maybe 2 or 3 different races. So you have to wonder what that means and what will happen. It may well be that Jim Cooper didn't leave any grass growing under his feet. He's been working very hard. He wants a very strong victory out of this, and we'll have to see how it turns out, because it was not apparent looking at the early voting that there was an African-American vote afoot, but although I think there was some pretty good turnout out in the Antioch area. But I need to look to see what else happens on that. And you don't have to vote in the area where you live. Right. When you're voting early vote, you can vote wherever close to work or whichever one of the locations you want to go to. It's
interesting to see Jim Cooper's commercials. He's highlighting President Obama, and that's the exact opposite of what the senatorial candidites are doing. Well, you would never see that.
You know the difference between when you're trying to get Democratic primary voters to vote for you versus Republican primary voters to vote for you. I'm trying to remember the last time I saw Jim Cooper run ads. I think it might have been in 2002. The first time he won the seat, and this was when Bob Clement decided to run for the U.S. Senate and lost to Lamar Alexander. I think that may have been the last time that he ran TV. Listen, any Democratic candidate who can get Barack Obama and use something he said about you that's very nice in their ad, you want to do that. And he's not only he's what they call in the business double trucking it. If you see it once in an ad break on a TV station, you may well see it twice in the same ad. In other words, in the same break, you'll see it twice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And part of that, for that particular ad, would make some sense because it's a pretty short ad and everything's really moving by real quickly. The second time you see it, you may get to understand, oh, that was Barack Obama. I saw, oh, that's Jim Cooper, because it moves really fast, and that's the purpose of it. But when you double truck it, you also have to pay for it twice. So he's been spending quite a bit of money, more money than I've ever seen him spend in a campaign on something like this. But then again, he may have a challenge. He wants to do that, and he may have decided if he does have a challenge like this, he's going to do what he can to make it happen. It would be a major upset in Nashville political history if Jim Cooper is defeated, because the person running against him who's going to likely to beat him is not well known at all. But it may be a sign of how the politics have changed in this country since COVID and since the George Floyd murder.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about mail-in ballots, Haggerty and Sethi, talked about Jim Cooper. What else will you be looking at tomorrow night?
I'll take a look at there are 2 Democrats running for the state Senate to run against Steve Dickerson. He's the only Republican really in our state delegation. There are almost no Republicans in our House delegation. His voting record is a lot closer on some things to being a Democrat than there are two ladies running against him. One of them is going to take him on in the fall, and that's another area that Democrats would like to be able to pick up that seat. And of course, the Democrats are a distinct minority, as the Republicans are supermajorities in both houses. The Democrats would love to pick up another seat, much as they did with Bob Freeman 2 years ago when he took over that seat that was Beth Harwell's seat before she retired being from being House Speaker and from being a longtime representative here in Nashville.
So that kind of sets the groundwork. We will take a break, and we're opening up the phone lines. There are a couple people on there already. Elizabeth, Mike, hold on. We will take your call, and if you want to call in, there is the number right there, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.